This is the Motivated Business Show, hosted by me, Mark Terrell, the author of Motivated, the Reluctant Leader's Guide to Building a Business that Sets You Free. In my book, I share the 7-step process to get the measure of your business. M.E.A.S.U.R.E is an acronym that stands for Mirror, Evaluate, Action, Systemize, Unify, Review, and Energize. On each episode, I'll be chatting to a business owner about how they stay motivated and how they've got the measure of their business. So without further ado, let's find out who's joining me on this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Motivated Business Business Show, even with me, Mark Terrell. Welcome along. Today's guest I met a while ago. Very interesting. He has his own podcasts and he's got loads to share with regards to sales and leadership and all that stuff. Before we get stuck into that though, just to mention my book. The reason being that in that book I share a 7-step process, which I will be referring to later on in the show. And if you want to learn more about that 7-step process, then you can buy that book. It's available from Amazon in Kindle or paperback form, or you can buy it direct from me from my website. So get in touch if you'd like a copy. And so without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Welcome, Marcus.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation, Marcus. Before we get into the conversation, let's give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, I coach typically salespeople, managers, leaders who are operating in crowded and competitive markets. I teach them the building blocks of communication and the dark matter of sales. So you can go to everyone else for tactics and techniques, for the technology stuff. But what I teach is the stuff that brings human beings together, that enables you to engage directly, brain to brain, with your customer in order to ensure that you're aligned, that you're putting their interests first. And by shifting your focus in terms of time from the short to medium term, it creates the breathing space that you need in order to be able to build relationships with other human beings whilst they're in the passive looking phase without trying to sell to them. Because if you do that, your close rate goes from 3% to north of 85%. The sales cycle is a fraction. And it just strikes me that we seem to spend most of our time doing busy work that costs us time, effort, and opportunity cost, and creates administration, which, let's face it, none of us like. So that's my bit.
Brilliant. So before we started, we had a brief conversation, and you actually had some really interesting things to say about the actual current situation that we're all sort of trying to cope with. So do you want to just go back and repeat yourself what you shared with me before we went live?
Okay, 2024 is a really pivotal year. This year, 50% of all democracies on the planet have a general election. This is a year after the arrival of ChatGPT and the explosion of AI. Today, I have access to 1 minute of a 6,000 qubit quantum machine. I have no idea how to use it, in fairness. But putting 2 and 2 together, that represents a vast opportunity for bad actors. It also represents an environment where a large number of people in business, in government, in leadership, in sales, in buying, will be uncertain. And the brain's default setting to uncertainty is the worst case scenario. So I figured, why not do any of that stuff that is associated with me, my company, my proposition, my partners, and then I'm not ever in the way. My job is to meet my buyer where they are, not where I wish they were. And more often than not, we're bombarding them at every stage in their journey, whether they've realized they have a problem, but they can't quite work out what it is, and they're making space for it, or they're passively looking to try and learn, how on earth do I deal with this thing? And what might a better future look like, then they go into active looking. Only then are they ready to speak to a vendor. Now, the data apparently tells us that they're already 70% of the way through their buying journey by the time they reach this moment. Well, that tells me that we as sellers and vendors are remiss. If we did our job right and we focused on the medium term pipeline instead of the short term pipeline, then we would be aligning ourselves with their timeline. And we would have time to build relationships with many people over time and understand the dynamics of the system in which they operate. The politics, the dynamics, who is in favor, who's against, who's neutral, who's unknown, where the roadblocks are, who has the ear of the people of influence or the ear of people who are obstacles. This gives us time because I want to keep my amygdala calm. I don't want it firing off and going into freeze, flight, or fight. That doesn't serve me. It certainly doesn't serve my customer because all it does is trigger theirs off. It's like when someone pukes, you start to feel pukey. Yeah, and if they keep puking, you're probably feeling a little bit sick now. Probably not the best thing to do. I should have picked another analogy, but you get the general gist. We mirror. Well, our job is to make them feel safe throughout that experience and be safe with us, have no associated perceived risk with us, not with their problem. Their problem is real. Well, it may be real, it may just be perceived. But we need to meet them where they are and understand their motivation. So this then brings us to this key issue of self-awareness, which I'll shut up for a minute because undoubtedly you have a question.
No, I'm loving it because obviously self-awareness is key to many things, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. But I was shared with you that I made a big purchase recently, and that was a car, and that's the first time I've done that for about 10 years. And the experience this time was a lot different than last time, thankfully. And I think it must be because they realise that most people are way down that journey with regards to purchase, like you said, 70% down. You're not walking into a showroom just completely, I see what they've got. I think that must be very, very rare. Most people have done the homework, they know roughly what they want, and they probably know that the car is there. So it's about how you nurture that person and actually find out where the gap is between them making a decision, I guess. Is that how
Well, this is really interesting. I saw a fabulous video of Carl Sagan, and he was defending his atheism, and he said he basically reversed Pascal's wager, and he said, for me, holding myself to the highest standard of moral behavior without someone peering over my shoulder means that if there is a God, I think he or she would probably think that was pretty impressive, because it wasn't because they feared that God, it was because they made that choice. And I think in sales, we need to adopt the same sort of attitude. And that's, I'm fascinated by that shift. Was it because they realized that every footfall customer treated the way they used to treat them, second-hand cars, would drive them off the forecourt in a time where people are afraid? We're in a cost of living crisis. We've just gone through 4 of the toughest years psychologically most people have ever or will ever live through, apart from the next 6. We've got a whole array of changes. We've got a bunch of Gen Z and millennial voting for the first, second, or third time. But their opinions, their view of the world, their perception of who they are and their place in the world was formed during a time when, first of all, there was plenty, and then there was this massive greed and extraction. And we saw this with the riots on, Occupy Wall Street and all of that. And then the crash. and the mishandling, the poor leadership. And what's really fascinating is I remember exactly the same criticisms being leveled at me and my generation by my dad and his friends, that the boomers and the Gen Xers are leveling at millennials and Gen Z. Fickle, don't know how lucky they are, that they've got it easy, they just can't seem to take responsibility, yada, yada, yada. What freaks, their music is shit. Okay, nothing changes. Okay, we need to change. And I think we as a generation, Gen X, are a bridge because we started 15 years later than where our parents did. When I entered the workforce, it was 1992, and I entered into the midst of Black Monday recession. Now, I had to take commission-only jobs, and then I was in recruitment for 10 years. And I started out with student debt. And as soon as I came out of university, the banks pulled the loans. So now all of a sudden I had to take out more loans at different interest rates, yeah, or up to my arse in credit card debt for decades. Okay, now that is being accelerated, and over the last couple of years, I mean, there was $700 trillion thrown into the pockets of the rich. I mean, it's a vast, even if it was billions, it's still an inordinate amount of money to be extracted out of the middle class and put in out of, because what happens when someone who is struggling to survive gets £1,000 or £5,000, they typically spend it on stuff. When someone who's got a net worth of 100 million and a family office gets £5,000, it goes into buying assets. So our kids are not going to be able to buy property because these people will have sucked all the property out. Now, we've got a moment in history now where there is going to be a change, whether we like it or not. And my thesis is we have, as sellers, as managers, as leaders, a responsibility to equip ourselves to make great decisions excellently in the moment by preparing ourselves for what's to come. And that's what I'm doing with my clients. It's fascinating, and it works.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. You before we, I always ask my guests to give me some topics to talk about, and one of the topics you gave me was humane critical thinking. Is that what you basically told us about there?
Yeah, it's thinking about the consequences and caring humanely. But I have a fundamental belief that almost all selling is selfishly self-orientated. And the language we use is offensive to the buyer's brain. It's threatening to the buyer's brain. Closing, handling, campaign. Yeah. And I mean, I as a buyer do not want to be handled by a salesperson whose main motivation is clearly to make me put my hand in my pocket and hand over my money. My long-term or short-term best interests are not really anywhere in their factoring. And it certainly is probably being filtered down from above because the money behind an organization permeates the culture beneath it.
I think it's worth saying there that it's we're all salespeople, aren't we? Because I mean, we can bracket people in, oh, they're a salesperson, but actually, we're all salespeople in one way or another. If we want to run a business, we have to understand that the selling might not be even just selling to a customer. It might be just selling the concept and the reason why this business exists. So that is all just as relevant, isn't it? And that's sort of like that leadership piece, understanding what actually, the Gen Zs, why they come to work in the first place, which is what I'm seeing, is that there's a completely different reason why they come to work than probably I did when I was their age.
Well, they are really hyper motivated, and they're driven, and they are eager to learn, and they spend their time and their effort on joining communities where, these are digital natives. And how many leaders and managers have a TikTok account, a Discord account, a Slack account? Do you have any idea what these people care about? because they have the power, the potential to be really incredible leaders. The ones that I've had the privilege of working with are breathtaking. They have close rates of 9 times higher than anyone else in the industry, and they never once put their buyer under any pressure. They introduce their closest competitors. They're absolutely transparent because they know that trading their reputation, their word for a moment of respite from their boss or for a momentary transaction just isn't worth it. They're trying to create a future where they push boundaries responsibly, where they build really strong community and they leave the world in a better place than they found it, unlike us and the previous lot.
So what do you think they're doing or not doing that we need to learn from them?
Well, the first thing, I'm going to push it back and I'm going to say we need to just stop for a second and bloody well listen without judgment. And this is where compassionate critical thinking really comes in, consequential critical thinking. Critical thinking on its own biases leadership towards the revenue side of the triangle, and they focus on the outcomes side over which none of us have any control, which means that what they do is they create the conditions where their salespeople's brains are panicking because they're set up to fail. They're being asked to put their buyers under pressure to buy prematurely. They're leading with discounts instead of actually understanding that 95% of the time, the money is not the real issue. And actually raising a discount prematurely just triggers doubt in the buyer's mind. And any form of uncertainty triggers preemptive buyer's remorse. They actually, you're creating the conditions of buyer's remorse in your buyer's brain before they've had a chance to buy your stuff. When you put your buyer under pressure, you trigger a bit of the brain that controls contempt and disgust. We've institutionalized this into playbooks. And I just look at it and I think, well, what if we don't do any of that stuff? What if you just don't do it? Well, what happens is there's this cumulative ripple effect that goes down the value chain, because when those things don't happen, you don't end up with the consequences. So I'll give you an example of poor thinking that is just critical. Critical thinking is we need to get more into the funnel because more is better. Okay, so a 3% click-through rate on a digital marketing campaign with a 15% conversion rate. If you do the maths, 0.003 times 0.15 equals 0.000045% success. Now, when you spent money on those adverts, were you spending it to generate revenue or were you spending it to generate click-throughs? Okay, so we now need to think, well, is this fit for purpose? This is the job to be done. And everyone in the business serves the job to be done. Now, everyone has a role to execute in playing their part, in making sure that the organization achieves the job to be done outcomes. However, the job to be done, if it's not clear, well, people will try and execute their bit as far as they're aware of what they think it is. So that's ambiguity from the top. Well, if you don't understand what the purpose of the business is, behind which everyone is motivated to support, then you're going to get people pulling at different directions. You end up with a blame culture. You end up with internal needless competition and friction. And it's hard enough as it is. Mm-hmm. And with the economy as it's going to be, I mean, think about it. January 2023, top performers were happy as pigs in poo. February, they weren't, because the context changed. The investors changed and moved the goalposts. That then triggered a whole slew of uncertainty. In tech, 300,000 people have lost their jobs. because of lazy management, lazy thinking, and the lack of consequential thinking. If you don't see those line items as human beings, they're just numbers on a spreadsheet. The job to be done really is serving the valuation target, not creating a great business to solve problems for customers over their lifetime that they want to come back for more and more and more, and great place to work and great place for your partners to work with. Now, isn't that what we really want? But we've turned most businesses, or many businesses, into financial instruments. And this is only going to get worse because all that money has to find a place to grow it. Yeah. It needs to replicate. And that is the driving force.
All interesting. Very interesting stuff. So are we talking about measuring the wrong things then? I've written down measure what matters. So when you think about when we're getting leads, actually what we should be measuring something completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so take a blank sheet of paper and in the middle draw a rectangle that's about 6 inches long and maybe 3 inches high. And then draw quadrants coming out of it. So it looks like a telescopic sight with a rectangle in the middle. And in the top left, write the word doing, top right, deciding, bottom right, delegating, bottom left, designing, middle, developing. Okay? Now, then what I want you to do is think about the last month. Where have you typically spent your time as a percentage in those 5 boxes? Okay? Now, most people will tend to skew towards the doing, and some will claim towards the delegating. Fair amount of deciding, very little in designing, and very little in developing. Our goal is to work out how we can move clockwise into the middle. And the way we do this is by valuing the time, the contribution of our time. In the activities we were doing, deciding, delegating, designing, or developing, was our time contributing $10 an hour, $100 an hour, $1,000 an hour, or $10,000 an hour? Now, if you do this exercise, by now you will feel a slight sickness in the pit of your stomach. But don't despair, because you just have created a roadmap to how to 10x your value and contribution per hour. And the way to do it is by moving those activities, those functions, down the chain of command responsibly with people who are capable and willing, and then give them the resources to succeed, which means you actually have to think consequentially and humanely. And if you do that, you create a flywheel. And before you know it, I have clients who are routinely at 600% ahead of their nearest competitor. Wow. Growth, profit, conversion rates. I mean, 600 would be a mean when they do this shift in their thinking in terms of timing. They put the customer at their heart, and they sign up to the values of thesellercode.org, all one word. If you believe that this is a better way, I'm encouraging you, go and visit that website. If you believe that that is how you want to be seen and perceived, and that is the person you want to be when you show up, then I dare you, add it to your email signature. I am proud to sell with the seller code, and then a link. Because if someone clicks it, they will hold you to account to that standard. But to me, that is the minimum standard that we as sellers should expect to deliver, because selling is the most noble act we can perform in any part of the business, because it is helping someone else make the best decision for themselves, for now and the future, whether it involves us or not. Now that's sales nobility, and I believe that is the baseline standard that every buyer deserves and every manager wants in their team, because those people sell evergreen no matter what the market. The recession's a good thing for people who sell like that.
Yes, indeed. Well, they say that some of the biggest companies were actually founded within a recession, and that's why they're successful because they learned to, to, to survive in lean times, I guess. Right, Marcus, I'm going to let you take a breather. I take a back step. I'm going to just share something from my book, which I think is relevant with regards to what we've been talking about. So those that are not familiar, this is the 7-step process which I share in my book. There's a chapter for each step. We've covered this really well in that Marcus has mentioned about self-awareness, understanding ourselves, and we've also covered this evaluation a bit about how we are taking somebody from here to where they want to be. Marcus has talked a lot about how sales fits into this situation, but I think what I want to actually focus more on is we've talked about motivation as key and what people come to work for, and I alluded to the fact that I'm pretty sure that when I was at this sort of age, maybe say 20s, I wasn't coming to work for this, which is making a difference. I'm sure that wasn't the case, but now that is the norm. But also what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of people coming to work wanting more, as you said, clarity and certainty.
Can I make a really important point at this?
Yeah, please do.
Um, at the moment, that driver is a significant pull, and you're seeing a shift in Gen Z. Women have tended to become more progressive and more left wing.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, 18 to 29-year-old men in particular look on in horror and skepticism. And you're also seeing this in terms of the non-aligned global South. They're going neutral as China and America duke it out. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they're just looking on and saying, well, this isn't our fight. Well, the same thing is happening with these generations, and they are then being pulled towards breaking the system. I believe sales is a force for good and a better alternative than going down the whole route of violent overthrow of the system,
Mm-hmm.
which is where we are headed if we don't tackle and address that need for the defender motivation to be addressed.
Yeah. And I've seen that more and more becoming in the top 3. People, and if we understand what actually people want, some security, want some certainty in their work, and how we allow that to happen, and that's obviously there's a leadership issue there with regards to communication and the environment that we create, and having a clear idea of where we're going as well. I mean, a lot of businesses are a little bit sort of have been sort of pounded by the waves and not really had a clear idea of actually where they're going. And if then they don't know where they're going, then they can't really communicate that very well. And obviously that doesn't lead to security and stability. So I thought I'd share that bit. And also I sort of share this model, which I don't talk about a lot, is actually, this is a 7-step process that we've got to go through. And a lot of people, well, the first thing to think about is that we can't be good at all these 5 steps. So we have to have a vision to start the process. But before we do that, we've got to check where we are. And so where are we? Then think about the vision, where are we going? And then we need to put in place a plan, and we need to facilitate that plan. And then we need to do it. And then once we've done it, we need to then go back to the check-in part. And so when we have a team, we need people that are good at all these parts, because we tend to be not very good at all 5 parts. And so when we're talking about certainty again, it's understanding how we fit everything together and that we do every step, and most importantly, not forgetting the checking bit. Checking where we are, how we've got to where we got to, and what we need to do next.
To reiterate what Mark is saying, in this type of environment, building resilience is really key. You can't do everything. So creating an ecosystem of adjacent providers and even competitors who you can refer. For example, one of the simplest things you can do is align yourself with a competitor and do a dead lead swap. If they're competent and good, but the buyer didn't buy, they've already done the pre-qualification. why not give them the cachet by closing that piece of business, by doing it well, by them making the introduction? They gain by making the introduction with that customer. They gain credibility. Now, build an ecosystem. You are part of a system, whether you like it or not. And the problem is, culturally, for the last 50, 60 years, we've built up an environment where the individual contributor has been put on a pedestal. No more. You need to be a partner seller. You need to align yourself internally, externally with partners. When you work with partners, don't think about the 30% commission that you're going to give them. Work out what is it they want to sell more of, and how do I help them sell 5 times more of it by bringing me in? That's a way more interesting proposition. Think as the other person. And again, you will have strengths and other people will have strengths that make your weaknesses irrelevant. In this environment, understanding your motivation and applying motivational maps in the context of your partner channel is really key. Understanding it internally, because you have to, you know that the hardest sale in most corporates is the internal one. By comparison to selling to the customer, it's a piece of cake. So pay attention. What Mark has talked about here is crucial, and you need to be prepared. So I'm going to leave you with a question. What are you doing to prepare for what's to come?
Interesting. Thank you, Marcus, for all you shared. Before you go, I'd like to ask you one question. What motivates you?
Learning. I didn't realize it. My wife and I have argued for about 21 years since we set the business up. And I finally succumbed to the realization. So the worst thing that has ever happened to our marriage is AI, because it's a thought partner. So yesterday, I developed a predictive tool that allows me to identify what the top performers do in leadership and management that everyone else doesn't do, and then create a model that it feeds. So a great model for everybody at the moment. So this was in fact, it's learning and synthesis. It's the learning from others. So for example, if you think of a triangle, down one side, you have relationship, at the bottom, you have strategy, and on the other, you have revenue. And you think, well, what are the inputs and what are the outcomes of each? Now, question, where do you spend the bulk of your attention? Typically, it's on revenue in most organizations. Mm-hmm. Okay, what does that mean that you are sacrificing? Okay, because an overemphasis on that tends to mean an underemphasis on strategy or relationships. Now, where do you focus your time and attention in terms of revenue? Well, most organizations try and manage the numbers. You can't manage the numbers. I don't make the decision that when you buy, if you buy, you do. I can manage the inputs. So again, where is the emphasis? Is it in the wrong place or the right place? Yeah. So that model is really powerful. Now, over the weekend, but in fact, yesterday at 5 o'clock until this morning at 7:30, I've been building this model. And it's been fascinating because I've been trying to understand my customer and see the world as they do. Now that is my big motivation.
Right. So look out for that being launched to the world very soon. So thank you again, Marcus. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. It's fascinating. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon to maybe continue the conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
So there we are. So that's Marcus Cauchi for you. Reach out if there's anything that you can help you with. We share a passion for motivation and self-awareness and all that's in the workplace, and also good quality leadership, because ultimately that is what makes the difference within organisations. So if you have not got a copy of my book, I've mentioned it a few times, then you know where to get it from. You can get it from Kindle. So you can get the Kindle or the paperback version from Amazon, and you can get a copy of the book from me direct if you'd like to get in contact with me. I'd love to send you a copy if you are interested. So that's today's episode. Thank you for those that joined us live. I hope you got some value from it. And until next time, have a great day, week, and take care of yourselves.